It's not uncommon to hear cops and politicians cry about the negative attention that police allegedly get in the media. Take Boston Police Department Commissioner William Evans, who regularly whines about how good deeds done by officers go unnoticed, while less flattering stories are pounced on. Don't kid yourselves. Having covered both the jacket and the media extensively in Greater Boston for more than a decade, I have on multiple occasions compared the number of positive articles about cops in a time frame with the number of negative ones in the same span. Upon inspection, the overwhelming amount of coverage is always about routine operations. Police arrest a perp, restore order to an unruly environment, or maybe clean up the disaster left behind by some drunken disorderly. I believe that those can more or less be considered positive stories that make cops look good, often rightfully so. But even if you don't count any of those TV clips and articles, the good outweighs the bad whichever way you slice it. There are a lot more clips about cops volunteering with the youth and saving seniors than there are about the use of force and excessive overtime. And so in my career as a reporter and editor, I have sought to expose first and applaud rarely. After all, departments spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on public relations each year. They can write their own press releases. With that spirit, and in the interest of continuing to dump on the Boston Police, I'll take this opportunity to note the work of my former colleague, David S. Bernstein. In an investigative piece for Boston Magazine earlier this year titled "Boston is a Shooter's Paradise," he revealed that out of 618 cases involving shooting victims between January 2014 and September of last year, 92 were classified as homicides. Of those, 14 had been cleared by arrest. The other 526 people who were shot survived. Of those, only 20 cases had led to an arrest. The total arrest rate had declined from 8% in 2014 to 6% in 2015 to barely above 1% in the still active 2016 calendar year. To my point, you have probably heard much less about that abysmal clearance rate than you have about the heroics performed by or movies and books that are inspired by the BPD. Bernstein is among the most respected journalists covering mass. Still, his revelation was ignored by most major outlets, while Commissioner Evans, in response to the findings, said that there is nothing whatsoever that his department can do differently, and blamed communities where violence takes place for their lack of cooperation. In our part over the past couple of years, DigBoston and the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism have shown how police and other authorities in mass abuse power in a number of ways. From concealing the specs about how our new all-electronic tolling system works on the turnpike, to forming private SWAT teams that aren't accountable to the public, to arresting motorists for no good reason, to using facial recognition software on every person who went to the first two Boston Calling Festivals in 2013. You can say that we relentlessly impugn the fuzz, but I would argue that most others in the local media are too soft. What else could possibly explain how all the stories I just noted made a bigger splash in the national press than they did around here? On Beyond Boston, we always try and represent a variety of viewpoints from several cities and towns. And then we look to see where the ideas intersect. For this month's episode, we've strung together a significantly wide gamut of coverage and commentary on cops, from criticisms such as mine, to features on community engagement efforts by certain departments, to an interview with one of the most learned voices on surveillance and privacy in mass. First up, we have a piece from Brookline Interactive Group about the firing of two officers who filed racial discrimination charges against their own department in that town.
In Brookline, the Board of Selectmen unanimously voted to fire two Brookline police officers after they had failed to return to work following their claims of racial discrimination from fellow police within their department. Prior to the vote, the Selectmen heard statements from the legal counsels representing the officers Prentice Pilot and Estefanos Zerari Misgun, as well as the counsel from the town to explain the findings of their investigation.
It is indeed unfortunate for the employees in the town that in the various instances there was no evidence to corroborate the employee's version or the version of the accused.
Commotion during the meeting started when the crowd began to get restless for a chance to voice their own opinions before the board made their final decision.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Chair, just to clarify, so are you allowing the community to speak prior to your vote?
No.
We have never been allowed the first time, the second time, the third time. We keep showing up, we keep taking off work.
You know what?
You're
I'm tired.
Give the floor to Gerald Austin.
Ex-Brookline firefighter Gerald Alston, the defendant of a surprisingly similar case that took place in Brookline last October, was among the audience members that persisted to make their voice heard.
Understand something. You are all human beings. You all have to understand something. Okay? What you did to me, you're doing to these police officers.
In spite of Alston and others' protests to the board, the selectmen went ahead and voted to fire the officers, despite the crowd's focus away from their agenda.
What did you vote?
We voted aye.
Here.
Each one of us voted aye on the motion.
You really do not deserve to be where you sit down representing the citizens.
It was kind of like amazing the way they snuck that in there while the first person had come to the microphone. But that was a decision that they had already made.
Over 100 residents and attendees showed up to attend the hearing, and many said they blamed the Board of Selectmen for mishandling the case, including the Brookline Police Chief Daniel C. O'Leary.
I'm not happy with the way it was portrayed up here today.
This is not Brookline, Massachusetts. This is Brookline, Syria. This is Brookline, Russia.
I just feel very sad about it, and I have to believe that there was another way to handle this.
When these allegations came to light, I addressed the entire membership of the department. And I said to them, it doesn't matter where these investigations come out. People felt certain ways in this department. We have to then look internally and look at ways that we can improve. And that's how we approached it.
In a written statement released to BIG from Brookline's town council, the town expressed its regret that its efforts to respond to Pilot and Zerari Muscoon's claims that included a racial climate review of the police department, ongoing department-wide anti-discrimination and retaliation training, and modifications to the town's anti-discrimination policy did not result in their return to work.
I am disturbed and concerned that somehow the town really needed to have done more than say, well, you said this, you said that, inconclusive, which it appears to be all that's happened.
Despite Brookline being known as a close-knit and communicative town, the response from attendees following the meeting suggested otherwise.
And it seems as part of this process, I'm not sure where they did hear public comment.
You can't come to a meeting and have the town people who voted you in sit there and announce to them, which is what Neil did, announce to them, I am not going to answer your questions. That's not democracy. That's dictatorship.
So you would say right now the open dialogue that the town holds
has been shut down. It doesn't exist.
And similarly here, the bias was to affirm the denials of the perpetrators. That's a serious problem. That's prevalent, I believe, in this town.
Reporting from Brookline Interactive Group, I'm Monique Avila.
Welcome back to Beyond Boston. Our guest this week is Alex Marthews, a Belmont resident and the national chair at Restore the Fourth, a campaign for digital Fourth Amendment rights. Now, I'm warning you, the things that Alex says, the trends that he identifies can be a little bit scary. Last time we spoke, he explained to me how Mass is rapidly installing surveillance on highways while bragging to the public about the convenience of such technologies. I have some questions for him about those menacing toll gantries and also about police body cameras and some other things that few other people are qualified to riff on. Alex, thanks for coming.
It's my pleasure, Chris.
I didn't mean to introduce you as a monster, but
I'm okay.
So we started talking this past week, and the reason we ended up here together is you've been doing some work and research into police body cameras.
Yes.
In your world, there's nothing is, black and white. There are a lot of granular aspects of the things that you look into. So what do people need to know about body cameras that, everybody has their idea? Yeah, obviously they should be there. Obviously they shouldn't be there. Where do you fall?
So in many ways I fall in between on this, because if you look at what the research says, body cams offer significant potential for improving people's encounters with the police on the street. When the police do a stop, are your rights going to be respected? Are you going to come out of it in one piece? This is important stuff. And in the pilot studies that they've done across the country, body cams can reduce police use of force, reduce complaints about the police in ways that we think are significant and are important. On the other hand, if body cams are not done properly, if they're not done well, then they can be introduced in a way that makes them a tool for additional surveillance by police without having additional accountability for police built into it. So it's possible to introduce them without really regulating what happens to the data, who gets to take a look at the footage, when the cameras should be on and off, whether there should be exotic new technologies incorporated into them like facial recognition. These sorts of questions are delicate and they involve your privacy when you're out on the street. They involve important issues that have to be carefully dealt with.
Now, there are hundreds of municipalities in Massachusetts.
Right.
I know you work at the federal level, the state level, and I'm sure down at the local level with these. This is a big learning curve for people. If this has to be fought in dozens of cities and countless municipalities across the state, what is the guidance from an organization like yours? How are you, it's so incremental, it's all over the place. How do you help people?
Well, there is a great organization that has been doing work in Boston on this called the Boston Police Camera Action Team. And they developed an ordinance for how body cams could be controlled and introduced. And they've held municipal meetings, they've worked with city council, they've really been doing great work over there. So their work is kind of a model for how other groups might work on it. But at the same time, at the state level, what we've been trying to do is to get past statewide guidance for police departments that might want to acquire body-worn cameras that sets high-quality policies for what would happen, and that bill is H2504. It's a really good piece of legislation, sponsored by Denise Provo here in Somerville.
Excellent. So, a lot of the things we've talked about in the past, it's like the police don't really know how to use the technologies. So the one that comes to mind is automatic license plate surveillance. I know your organization, and certainly as a reporter, I've gone to cities and towns. Some of them have literally no policy whatsoever. How, whether it's license plate recognition or police body cameras, is there any, who is putting the pressure on departments to actually have policies in place that, say, hey, you need to know how to use this stuff before you take it out on the street?
Well, I think what we're seeing here is a historical issue that there isn't really yet an active culture of democratic accountability for the police. And when it comes to elected officials in many towns and cities in Massachusetts, sometimes in the case of towns, they may not have the power to oversee the police department properly. Sometimes they just aren't used to doing it. And so when the police department or the police chief wants to acquire new equipment, new surveillance equipment, new military style equipment, then often elected officials feel shy about having a say. What we want to do and what we're working on various axes to do is to pass ordinances in different municipalities in Massachusetts that would affirmatively say that the police have to come to the elected officials, have to hold a public hearing, and have to get the permission of the elected officials and have to know ahead of time before they deploy surveillance technology, how is this going to work? They have to have given it serious thought instead of just doing it on the fly.
One of the big pieces I wrote in the past couple of years, and that I think you commented on, was related to facial recognition software being used on people without them realizing. Can you just explain how that works and tell me, do people think you're crazy when you talk about this? I mean, it's been around for years now, and I still feel like people look at me like that's Minority Report, you're making that up. How do you, as an advocate, kind of get past that and have people actually listen? Hey, this is here to stay.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned Minority Report, because for what civil liberties folks like me regard as something that is kind of unnerving, Taser, which is the lead player in body cams, has made public statements that suggest that they view it more as kind of a model. That this kind of body cam surveillance can be very helpful to law enforcement, and they are making offers to law enforcement of essentially free equipment for the first year, making the money on the back end with data management. So And with a plan to incorporate facial recognition very broadly in body cameras to help police, as they would put it, manage the threat environment and know if somebody had an outstanding warrant through recognizing their face. So this is real, it is coming, and it is part of serious and well-funded corporate efforts.
And we're seeing a lot of these technologies now, being melted together. And so, this is the part of the show where, people really want to get involved. We have a lot of people who watch. We have different topics. How can people get involved? Not just with your group, but you mentioned there's bills in municipalities across the state. A lot of action, lobbying, I'm sure, at the State House. And I'm sure that people watching who maybe do have some education on this and can educate some of their legislators. So where do they start?
Well, when it comes to Massachusetts, the most straightforward way would be to shoot an email to digitalfourth@protonmail.com and let us know what municipality you're in, and then we'll have somebody contact you and be able to orient you to local activism.
Awesome. And now for a segment from Neighbor Media at CCTV about youth partnerships which Cambridge is forming in an attempt to reduce crime, followed by closing comments by BINJ Network Director Jason Pramas.
Hi everyone, Frank Morris Lopez here with Rock Lewis, one of our correspondents at neighbormedia.org. Check out his videos and more on our site. And Rock had a chance to recently follow a Cambridge police officer who is going to be a contestant on the NBC show American Ninja Warrior. Rock, tell us a little bit about this police officer.
His name is Steve Allen, and I got a chance to talk with Steve about his workout, being in the police department, and him being selected to go on American Ninja Warrior.
Great. So, Steve is from Cambridge, and whereabouts in Cambridge?
Around the North Cambridge area, Jackson Place, that's where he grew up.
Okay, and in the video, Steve calls it, the Cambridge Projects. And he also talks a little bit about how he didn't necessarily have a good relationship with police. But it wasn't a bad one either. What can you tell me about that?
Just about probably a young man growing up, and then just running around, and his choice of becoming a police officer was his turnaround in life.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so he's a Cambridge police officer and a very strong one. So what you followed him on some workouts?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Oh, he's very strong. I mean, he had up to 30 pounds of gear on him, and to see him do all those workouts, and I tried some of them, I couldn't. And,
Impossible.
Impossible. He made it look easy.
Yeah, of course. Well, in addition to being, a strong Cambridge police officer and being a contestant on the show, he really wants to be, a role model for the community.
Yeah.
And what did you learn?
He loves kids. He wants to do something to help the kids, and being on the show is gonna be like a great aspiration. And you can see on the video where he's reading to the kids. I think he has a 5-year-old daughter. And I think that's he mentioned it on the video. It's not about him. He wants to be a role model for other young kids to see him and how he made it, I guess you could say.
Great. Well, let's take a look at Steve in action.
What's going on, American Ninja Warrior? My name is Steve Allen. I'm from Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'm a police officer. Last year in season 8, yes, I slipped halfway through the course, but I'm coming back stronger for season 9. I grew up in a public housing development in the north side of Cambridge, which some are categorized as the hood or the projects. I learned from my experiences growing up, which I took full advantage of and created my own path for myself. I didn't have a good relationship with the police, but I necessarily didn't have a bad one either. Playing sports and working out always was something that I used as an outlet to stay focused and stay out of trouble. Last year, I competed in season 8 in Philadelphia, where I slipped and fell on one of the obstacles halfway through the course. I was very upset and disappointed, knowing that I failed. But this motivated me to come back more prepared and much stronger. My main reason is not just me. It's not about me. It's about the people outside of me and the effect that I can have on not just people, but young people. And that's a lot of the big reasons why I want to be on the show.
I'm gonna call the doctor, and the doctor said...
When writing for Beyond Boston, I'm quite conscious of the fact that I'm talking to a largely white suburban audience, which is different for me because as an urban journalist, I'm normally writing for a multiracial urban audience. So when the subject turns to the police and their discontents, I feel that I have to say some things to a suburban audience that I wouldn't need to say to most members of an urban audience. For starters, yes, cops are people too. That should go without saying. And as people, some cops are good and some are bad. More to the point, cops are not heroes the moment they put on the badge. Like soldiers in the American military, they are only heroes when they do something heroic. When an officer saves a little kid that falls down a well, or takes down a lunatic who starts shooting people at random, everyone can agree that's heroic. When an officer starts an after-school tutoring program for neighborhood kids, or a blood drive for people with a rare blood type, that's commendable. And communities should certainly celebrate civil servants who do commendable or heroic things, on or off the job. But when a white officer guns down a black child for no reason but the irrational fear and hatred that comes from stone-cold racism, that's reprehensible. That's criminal. That is murder. And no amount of flag-waving bluster changes that fact. Which is why I want to encourage white people in predominantly white suburban communities to try to understand where people in majority-minority communities like Boston are coming from when we call for the reform of the police and the criminal justice system in the United States. We're not trying to disrespect the good cops. We're trying to see the bad cops brought to justice and change the system that police work within to make it much less likely to produce more bad cops. Let me put it this way. I'm a white guy who grew up in a white working and middle-class suburb on the North Shore. Prior to moving to Boston for college, as a somewhat reckless teenager, I had a couple of minor run-ins with the local police. And at no time did I have to fear for my life when interacting with those police. In both cases, my friends and I were able to talk ourselves out of trouble. Voices were never raised at us. Guns or other weapons were never drawn on us. We were never cuffed, and we were certainly never physically attacked in any way. And we knew that wasn't going to happen. We knew that we had a good chance of getting away with our minor mischief with nothing more dangerous than a warning. Because we understood at a gut level, from both common experience and from mass media, that white kids usually don't have to fear the police, unless they commit a significant crime, and not even then if they are rich and or have the right connections. But when black kids of any class background find themselves in the exact same situation in cities and towns all over America, all too often their communities will soon have to deal with the tragedy of their premature deaths. Kids who at worst have committed the kind of misdemeanor that my friends and I were able to talk ourselves out of 30 plus years ago get gunned down nearly every week in the US by police officers who are, by any standard, completely out of control. Sometimes for nothing more than looking at a cop the wrong way, or for wearing the wrong clothes, or literally for no reason at all. Black people have to live their lives today in the 21st century knowing that at any moment they could not only find themselves in hot water with a cop for the mere fact of being black, but also that any white person at any moment, racist as we all are to one degree or another in this society, might feel uncomfortable around a black person and call the cops on them. And once that happens, that person could be mere minutes away from an early and violent demise. That is one reason why the Black Lives Matter movement sprung up all over the country a few years back. And that is why a white urban journalist like me is telling a largely white suburban television audience like you that we all need to keep the situation at the top of our reform agenda going forward. And then we need to resolve to support the good cops, bring the bad cops and bad leaders that give them their marching orders to justice, and join the Black Lives Matter movement and other civil rights organizations in making the principle of justice for all truly meaningful in our communities and our nation, for all time and for all Americans, and all immigrants and refugees too. For Beyond Boston, I'm Jason Pramas.
3, 2, 1.